Welcome to The Wandering Drew. I am Drew. Thank you for joining me. And on today's video, I'm going to discuss a little bit about the hike I just completed, the C&O Canal Towpath. I'm going to discuss the Canal Towpath itself, a little bit of history, since I didn't do that too much while I was hiking. And also, I'll discuss a little bit of my performance. I hope that you will join me. Welcome back. And this video will probably be a little bit longer than most of the videos that I completed or posted while I was doing the hike. I took an effort to make those a little shorter for multiple reasons. One, so not to bore people, and two, to make them easier to upload while I was out on the trail. So now onto the canal. The C&O Canal is sometimes referred to as the Grand Old Ditch. And it was in service from about 1831 to 1924. And at its longest working portion, it went from Cumberland, Maryland to Washington, D.C., or Georgetown, which is what I hiked. There were other portions planned, including following the Gap Trail, or the Great Allegheny Passage Trail, all the way up to Pittsburgh. But that was never built. One of the reasons for the long delays and why no additional canals weren't built was because the C&O Canal Company was almost always in financial trouble. And eventually, railroads took over and hurt their business so bad that they could not sustain it. In fact, construction on the canal started in 1828 and wasn't completed until 1850. But as soon as portions of the canal were completed, they went into operation so that the company could recover some of its costs. And much like a highway or a toll road, the C&O Canal Company made money by charging people for using the canal based on what they were carrying, how much of it, and how far they went along the canal. The longer you went, the more you paid. And certain goods were charged at a higher rate. One of the greatest features of the canal is the Pawpaw Tunnel. And the Towpath Tunnel is 3,118 feet long. By building this tunnel, they were able to save about 6 miles of river passage, including multiple horseshoe bends. Over 6 million bricks were used in the construction of this tunnel. And depending on what source you use, it took either 12 to 14 years to complete, although several of those years it looks like there was no construction due to problems with funding and paying the workers and materials. Additionally, it was only supposed to take 2 years to build. But because of the delays and sometimes contract disputes or fights among the various workers, it was stretched out and cost way more than originally anticipated. And the tunnel is frequently quoted as being a haunted location, especially one story that is told where there's supposed to be the ghost of a lock tender that worked at that area at the exit on the south end of the tunnel who was murdered. One day, boat tenders discovered his house burned to the ground and his body was inside. His skull had been crushed by a heavy blow, and he was known to have a coin collection that was discovered to be missing. So obviously, he was killed. His coin collection was stolen, and most likely his house, along with his body, was burned in an attempt to hide the crime. This particular lock tender was well liked and well known by all the canal boatmen. Several months later, while in a nearby town, a person was observed buying drinks with rare coins, several of which the boat tenders recognized as being this lock tender's coins. The man was originally set upon by the boat tenders, who began to beat him, and they were about to take justice in their own hand when the bartender interceded and insisted that the sheriff be called and the man be arrested and given a fair trial. And that's exactly what happened. He proclaimed his innocence, but in the end, he was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death for the murder and theft of the lock tender's coins. He ultimately confessed prior to his hanging, and that person was hanged for the crime. It is said that the lock tender's ghost still haunts the Paw Paw Tunnel. I personally went through the tunnel early in the morning by myself, and I did not experience any unexplained circumstances. Now, it is a little spooky going through the tunnel. I think that's really because how many of us are used to being enclosed by a mountain and underground? It's dark in there. It's definitely an eerie location, but also I was there early in the morning. I don't think ghosts typically are known for being out in the daylight in the morning. So I can't say whether it is or not, but I find it hard to believe that if this ghost wanted to haunt the place, he would haunt the tunnel and not the lock or the house where he was actually murdered. But, you be the judge. Many paranormal investigators, or so-called paranormal investigators, report a lot of unexplained occurrences at this tunnel. Additionally, there are several other locations that are known to have ghost sightings along the tunnel. Remember, this tunnel was in operation for a long time. There had been a lot of catastrophes along this canal during its operation. Multiple people have died along this canal, whether by accident, by construction, or even war. This area is rich with history of our country and an armed conflict. I find a lot of these stories to be a little far-fetched, but I wouldn't say I'm a believer, but I wouldn't say I'm a naysayer either. You be the judge. Along the towpath in Georgetown, adjacent to lock number 3, there is a bust. That bust is of Supreme Court Justice William Douglas. Justice Douglas is the longest serving justice in the history of the Supreme Court. He was instrumental in preserving both the canal and the towpath and making it available for us to use today. He protected it from being turned into a highway. The U.S. government purchased the canal and the right-of-way in 1938, but did nothing with it because of World War II starting. After World War II, they decided that they would probably build a highway in the area to enable people to get outdoors and also to bring traffic, which also meant revenue and income, to a lot of the towns along the Potomac River, where the canal went. So one of the prominent newspapers of the day wrote an article, an opinion piece, supporting this plan to turn the canal and its towpath into a highway in order to allow people to enjoy the beauty of the Potomac and travel from and to Washington, D.C. and these other communities. Justice Douglas went on the offensive. He wrote a letter to the newspaper that supported this and presented his reasons for preservation of the towpath. Justice Douglas was an avid outdoorsman. He was an environmentalist, I guess before you would say they were environmentalists. He had also assisted in numerous other locations in supporting and preserving rivers and lakes and other type of outdoor projects. He also frequently used the towpath when he was in Washington, D.C. to hike or exercise. So he understood the value that this green space was for people who live in a city and don't have a resource available. Additionally, many people use that area for fishing and boating, and he felt that this was a great resource that needed to be preserved, not to mention the historic value to our country. So in his letter, besides just explaining why this needed to be saved, he issued a challenge. He challenged the author of that article and the editor of the paper to join him on a walk on the towpath, a hike basically. And they would go from Cumberland, Maryland to Georgetown. And along the way, they would see the different sites and they would meet different environmental groups and different communities and understand what this towpath and the canal means to the area. Surprisingly, the editor took him up. But it wasn't just the editor. It became more than just him. It became numerous people. In essence, a large group of people wanted to go on this hike with them. So this party, which should have been small, grew to about 58 people. All different people who are connected to the community, the river, the canal, and the towpath. A lot of them on the side of preservation. But there were several newspapermen as well, and other community leaders. And they started making this hike. Now, Justice Douglas was, as I said, an outdoorsman, and he kept a pretty rigorous pace. They were fortunate in that they did not have to carry all their gear. They had someone shuttle their gear to their location where they would be staying every night, and then they would meet people. But all along their hike, people from the community also came out to join them and meet with them, and also explain why this was important to them. In fact, this was not an easy hike. Out of the 58 people that started, only 9, including Justice Douglas, finished the trail in 8 days. Much like me, they kept a pretty rigorous pace of doing just over 23 miles a day. Although Justice Douglas supposedly walked at about 4 miles per hour. So that's a lot faster than I walk. So it was hard to keep up. In fact, it wasn't an easy hike either, because they did this in March and they ran into a snowstorm on day 2, which caused a lot of the people to drop out. News of this hike made news itself, and it was followed and published in the newspapers, and people were interested in this. It renewed interest in the C&O Canal and the towpath, and resulted in the editor and several of the other newspapers changing their view and no longer supporting another highway being built on this canal. And as a matter of fact, that made a association or a governing body of the C&O Canal and towpath, and then later on, that became the governing body of a park, which then was turned over to the National Park Service. And on every sign, Sergeant Large signs, it notes that the canal is dedicated to Justice Douglas because of his efforts in preserving it. And this is why his name is on the signs, and a bust of him stands adjacent to lock number 3. Okay, so enough on C&O trail history. There's so much more, but you'll have to research it yourself. I think that this trail is a great resource. I truly wish I lived closer to it and was able to take advantage of it and the numerous other trails that intersect and come from this trail. While I regret to say that bicyclists clearly are the main users of this trail, and it's not hikers anymore, I'm glad to say that there are still resources for hikers, and this is a great opportunity for people of all skill levels to hike. This trail is a hiker's dream, especially for newer hikers. The availability of free campsites that you don't have to pre-plan and book, they're readily available with facilities nearby. A bathroom, it's usually it's just a porta potty, and water that's available during the warmer season make this perfect for someone that is just starting out or wants to do trips of any length. You can go out for a mile if you want, or 184 miles. It doesn't matter, it's up to you. And the availability of these camps interspaced throughout the whole towpath make it easy for you to do planning. They're fixed locations. So with a little bit of planning, you can do anything from an hour or 2 on the trail to a whole day to a multi-day trip. And this is great because you can alleviate taking some of the heavier items that you would need to carry, like water. If you want to, you can even arrange it so that you have places to stay. There are places to stay, like cabins, or there's an RV park or 2 along the way that you can rent something. There are numerous hotels or even bed and breakfast along the way. With careful planning, you can stick to those areas. Additionally, and I didn't look into this because I figured it would be too expensive, but while I was on the trail, I looked at the C&O Canal lock tender houses. They're available for rent as well. And they're actually not that expensive when you figure what you're getting. You're getting a historic site. Services are limited there. There's no internet or cell service with these rooms. Some of them have running water, some of them don't. You have to use a pump. Most of them don't have electricity, but it's still an indoor place to stay that if you want more privacy or you don't want to carry a tent, you can book these things in advance and arrange to stay in them. So there's easily anyone of any varying desire or skill level can use this towpath and do a good hike. The fact that the terrain is nearly level and it's very easygoing in terms of walkability make this a good plus. Additional to water availability at most campgrounds and bathrooms, most of them, if everyone I saw had a fire ring at a campsite, usually a picnic table, and a lot of them had grills as well. So with a lot of planning, you can go out there, make food, make a fire if you want. Wood is available in the ground, and you can enjoy yourself. Other activities that you can do along here are obviously using boats for fishing, for just exploring, kayaking, canoeing. Some areas are restricted to non-motorized watercraft, so you need to do a little bit of research. But there are numerous boat ramps, public boat ramps throughout, and there are several private campgrounds as well. Additionally, the history is there. Besides some of the things I've already mentioned, there are numerous places like Harper's Ferry, historic site, the Antietam battlefield, Fort Frederick. All these places are places you can visit, and they usually have campgrounds and hotels nearby as well, not to mention food and restaurants. And if you really wanted to, you can plan your trip around stopping off at these places to pick up food along the way, so you don't have to carry a lot of food. And of course, as I already mentioned, cycling. Cycling is probably the most use that this trail sees all year long. So with a bicycle, traveling several miles is not that big of a deal. And even going off trail to a hotel or a restaurant at a mile or two is not that long of a trip. Nobody likes doing extra mileage, but for a warm bed, a shower, and food, I'll easily bicycle a mile or two out of my way. And in the history of this area, you have things going back to the French and Indian War, the Civil War, and all the periods in between, including the Revolutionary War. So, okay, enough of that. So now, if I was to do this trail again, and I would gladly do this trail again, I would love to do that, what would I do differently? My previous video, I discussed some ideas in my equipment video, but there's some more things that I would do differently, and not related to equipment-wise. First, most likely I would go southbound this time. I would start in Cumberland and travel to Washington, D.C. or Georgetown. That would put me going with the grade, which trends downward. That's not really a big deal. It's a very subtle grade. The whole trail from Cumberland to Washington, D.C. only has an elevation change of 660 feet. Not a big slope at all. The biggest thing I would do is try to go in cooler weather. I went in the end of June and it was hot. There were several days that were in the mid-90s with near or 100% humidity. And that made it for uncomfortable sleeping. I didn't mind so much hiking because you're shaded majority of the time from the trees. But I can only imagine what this area would look like during the winter when the trees have no leaves to block your views, or during the turning of the leaves in the fall. It must be absolutely gorgeous to be out there in some cooler weather with the leaves turning all these different colors. And I would also, like most hikers all say, but we very rarely do, is slow down. If I was to do this again, I would take my time, stick to lesser mileage per day, and visit some of the sites that I just mentioned, like Fort Frederick. Spend time in Harper's Ferry. Go visit the Antietam battlefield. A couple of other towns along the way. I would spend more time visiting those sites and taking them in. I would plan more of my trip around them rather than just trying to power through it. But I say that all the time, but yet I still do it. It's something that I'm still working on, and obviously I'm not doing a good job at. I may even plan on staying in more hotels or the cabins of the lock keepers a little bit more, so I could get a shower and stay out of the wet, humid weather. So I would visit more places, see more things, and I would also get some more food more often in the area, in the towns I'm traveling. That would have meant a lighter pack with less food on board, which would have meant a more enjoyable hike. As I mentioned in my last video, I think I could have easily gone stoveless on this hike, and I probably would, especially if I was planning to go eat out more and carry less food. I think it is an easy transition that I could do or anyone could do on this hike. Also, when I went, it was so hot that I should not have taken my sleeping bag. It was just way too hot to even use it or even lay on it. I was sweating so much. Also, after I filmed last week's equipment video, I realized I forgot one critical piece, perhaps one of the most important pieces of equipment that I should have reviewed: my shoes. I carried Merrell Moab 2 ventilator shoes. That's what I used to hike in. And this was the first time I did a long hike with these shoes. I had bought them just prior to going on this hike. It's my first pair of Merrells I've ever owned, and I enjoyed them. I did take them on a long day hike, which I have recorded, and I'll be posting that video eventually, which I took before this hike, and I did have an issue with blisters on it, but not quite as bad, but I also didn't go quite as long. And I thought the KT tape would help address that, because I put KT tape on those locations where I had blisters on that hike. It didn't work out that way. So I may be going back to Leukotape, which is a little sturdier and a little more adhesive to the skin in the future. We'll see. But I also have to say, I've used Ultra shoes and Salomon shoes and not had blisters in these locations, although I have had them there recently. So it may be something about the way I'm walking now or the style, but I definitely think these shoes contributed to the blisters. Additionally, I use the stock inserts, although I have some more durable personal shoe inserts that I use on occasion. I was just too lazy to transfer them from one shoe to another, and I just didn't take them. That might have made a difference as well. We'll never know. So while I like those shoes, and obviously I'll keep them in the rotation, I think I could have done better with them. This trail is also hard. And I don't just mean physically hard. Obviously you're walking a lot. I mean the ground itself is hard. It's well compacted soil, which does not have a lot of soil actually. There is rock or rock chips everywhere. So it's extremely hard on your feet and not very forgiving. And if you don't understand the type of different tread, walk on rock for a while and then walk on some dirt, or do a multi-day hike and you'll feel the difference. There were times that I would walk on the side of the trail or even on the grass in the middle just for a little bit of cushioning because it felt better on my feet. And I can clearly feel it, especially after a day or two when your feet are quite raw. So while I didn't lose any nail, I did bruise one toe, which I've had a constant problem with all across every single shoe I've used, so I know it's not the shoe. I'm considering going back to Ultras and trying them again due to the large foot box. Supposedly they've returned to their roots a little bit, and some of the toe boxes might be a little bit larger than they've made in the last model or so. So I'm considering giving them a chance. I'll see about that. And actually, I wouldn't even mind joining the cyclists on this trail one day. I think cycling would be a great way to do this trail again and to see more of it by getting my mileage done in a short amount of time by traveling faster. Having a bike would, as I mentioned before, make it much easier to visit sites, to get off trail, to either stay in a hotel or to visit sites or get food. And this may be on the table in the future. If I was to bicycle it, I would combine this with the 150 long Gap or Great Allegheny Passage Trail, which connects to it, and they meet up in Cumberland, Maryland. And I would do both trails together for a roughly 335 mile bike ride. And I would go from north to south. So I would travel from Pittsburgh to Washington, D.C., following the grade all the way down. The Great Allegheny Passage has a little more elevation change, but once again, because it was a railroad, it is very smoothly graded to permit the trains to travel rapidly without issue. If I was to start cycling, that would mean purchasing a bike to train and also purchasing equipment. Like, I need another hobby. And I'm afraid Mrs. Drew might not be as supportive of me bringing in more equipment, not to mention the cost of purchasing that equipment. I still enjoy traveling by foot, but cycling is a great way to travel on this and several other trails throughout the United States. And I have to admit, several times while walking, I was a little envious of the cyclists that would come whizzing by me at 10 to 20 miles an hour. And I would think to myself, wow, just 10 or 20 or even 30 minutes on that bike, and I would travel so much further down the path than I'm doing right now by walking. Especially when it came to have to decide whether or not to feel justified of going off trail to get food, which I usually bypassed because I didn't want to put the extra mileage on my feet. Even a moderately traveling cyclist goes at least 7 miles an hour or faster. That's twice as fast as I was going. Most cyclists go much faster than that and would do what I did in 8 to 10 hours in just 3 or 4 hours of traveling. So as mentioned, the bicycle allows for greater detours, the greater ability to see sights and visit them. For instance, I looked at going to Antietam, but when I looked into it, it was a 12-mile walk from Harper's Ferry to the Antietam battlefield. That would be a 24-mile round trip. That's as much as I traveled in most days. That would take me several hours, 8 hours or so, to walk that, maybe even 9. Where a bicycle ride would just be 2 or 3 hours. And that's not one way, that's a round trip. So you still have plenty of time to visit the park and go around them. Now, I could have walked there in one day, stayed at a hotel or a campground closer, which you have to pay for, and then continued on my way. There are options, but the bicycle makes that a little bit more palatable, not to mention gives you more options. Now I want to recap my performance. I'm happy with my performance. On this trip, I spent more days consecutive out on the trail than I've ever done on any other trip, and I also went more distance or miles than I ever went total, and I also went my most miles I've ever done in one day. I averaged 23.06 miles per day over the 8 days. And as always, decisions you make early affect decisions later on. Each day is not an individual day, it's a chain. The chain is the whole trip. So by deciding to push a little further on day 2 and 3 to get to Harper's Ferry or to make certain campgrounds, I set myself up to succeed on the push on day 8. Because without doing those extra miles on day 2 or 3, I never would have been close enough to complete the trail on day 8. That wasn't my goal, it just worked out that way. And for some reason, like I said, I can't stop but be competitive and want to get that mileage done. Something I still need to work on. I know being out there is not a race, but it's also still hard to forget that my time out there is limited. I still have the outside world, and with today's world with cell phones and reception, it's hard to escape family and work. They find you, they call you, they bring you in to things so you can totally not escape the outside world. And there are pressures to bring you back into things that are going on because the world is still moving on while you're on the trail. So there are problems at home and sometimes there are problems at work that take away from you really immersing yourself in this outdoor experience. The days that I didn't have reception were, to me, the best days. I'm going to go into a little stats here, but very limited. And if you want some more stats, you're a nerdy like me and you want to analyze what I did and how far I walked each day, I'm going to put that in the description box of this video so I won't take time up with this. The only thing I did want to do is I wanted to recap some of my stats. I found my notes on my backpack of before I left, and I'm looking at my notes now so I will get the weights correctly. When I left, my pack weighed 26.9 pounds. That was without fuel, the fuel canister, and water. Those items I purchased when I reached Washington. So 26.9 was the weight, basically, when the pack went onto the airplane and was shipped to Washington with me. I purchased water, I had fuel, and I had a bottle of Gatorade. So I figured it was approximately 4.4 pounds for the water, or the fuel bottle. With the Gatorade, which is about 20-ounce bottle of Gatorade, that's another 1.3 pounds. I figured that when I hit the trail, I was 32.6 pounds. So as I said, obviously my weight went down. When I left, it was 26.9 pounds. When I came home, it weighed 19.5. So I lost 7.4 pounds of weight, which was all food and drink mix, I guess. So that's the stat on that. So I'm glad to be done. I'm glad to be back home. I got to see my family I've cleaned up most of my gear and packed most stuff away. I'm happy that I was able to complete this trail and basically tick it off and say I've done it. It was also good for me psychologically to have no experience of pain or discomfort or issues with both my knee and my ankle. While I didn't do a lot of elevation, I feel I did do a lot of mileage. And it was good that it conditioned me and it let me know that I can still commit to doing a physical trail of several days with long mileage. I am already setting my sights on my next hike, and I'll be discussing those in the future as I do some planning. It's hard to fit into all the things that are going on. I have several things I need to do with my family that I put off or delayed over the last year, like most of us, because travel was restricted and because I've been doing hikes. So I just need to try to juggle all these pieces. I want to thank you for coming along on the journey and your support. The positive emails and texts that I receive, or messages and comments in the videos, really do motivate me, and I appreciate them more than you will know. So please keep the comments and the encouragement coming, and feel free to ask any questions or comments, good, bad, or otherwise. I'm open to critique as well. So once again, thank you for watching. Please leave a comment below, and if you feel so inclined, consider subscribing to the channel. Till we meet again.